substances. I mean, you said you've gone through the record. That wasn't really an issue at this trial. He's said it from day one.
Oh, so you're saying he's already admitted to the diagnosis?
He's already admitted to the use of the substances.
Well, again, there's a difference between admitting to substance use and substance use disorder.
Let's go back to what you just said about narcissistic personality traits.
Yes.
Narcissistic personality disorder is a DSM-5 diagnosis, correct?
Correct.
Diagnostic personality, and you haven't testified that Mr. Depp has narcissistic personality disorder, have you?
I would certainly, if I didn't, I'm certainly thinking that, but at least I'm going to say he has traits which are characteristics of provisional diagnosis of, it's a provisional diagnosis of probably narcissistic personality disorder. But yeah, I mean, I do believe that.
Well, when you say provisional diagnosis, you know the DSM-5 requires, in order to find that diagnosis, 5 of the 9 factors. Mm-hmm. And you haven't done that analysis. You've never made that diagnosis. You've just identified certain factors.
That are criteria for the diagnosis.
Right. But you need 5 of 9 to get to the diagnosis. You've already told us that you didn't make a diagnosis. You're just identifying traits, correct?
I'm identifying traits that are consistent with the diagnosis, yes.
Right. And did you testify in deposition that the existence of traits, as opposed to the disorder, doesn't have a correlation with IPV?
If I said traits do not have a correlation with the, if that's what I said, and I don't remember saying that, but that wouldn't be a correct saying. Narcissism has a correlation with the diagnosis. Yes, that part's true.
All right, how far are we going to back this up? Because there's a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, mm-hmm. right?
Yes, sir.
And that one is has some correlation with IPV, right?
Narcissism has correlation with IPV. Again, sir, you're not allowing me to answer. You're splitting hairs. You're splitting hairs between the traits that are consistent with, which all I'm commenting on is behaviors and traits that are consistent with the diagnosis. And Mr. Depp, narcissism absolutely has risk factors associated with IPV.
Let's go back again, and maybe we can focus on the question I ask you, and we can get an answer that's addressed to that question. Mm-hmm. Narcissistic personality disorder is a risk factor for IPV, yes or no?
Yes.
And you previously testified that there is no literature at which you are currently aware that the mere presence of narcissistic traits is a risk factor for IPV.
Am I answering the question?
Yes.
That's incorrect.
You didn't testify that.
A cluster B traits, which narcissistic personality disorder is part of, is a huge risk factor for intimate partner violence, which include, cluster B traits include narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, amongst others. So the answer to the question is every resource on intimate partner violence will support that cluster B traits where narcissistic personality falls under is a risk factor for intimate partner violence.
Any single trait is a risk factor for IPV.
Again, I will repeat, cluster cluster B traits. I didn't say any trait. I said cluster. No,
Oh,
you said
let me be more precise then.
okay.
Any narcissistic trait in and of itself is a risk factor for IPV.
But you are mischaracterizing what I said. What I said, I'm pretty sure I said cluster. If you look at all the intimate partner violence literature, and it would behoove you to do so, you will see that cluster B traits. I didn't say narcissistic per se. Cluster B traits, where narcissistic personality disorder is part of, are risk factors for intimate partner violence, part and parcel, uniformly true. And I'm not sure, the thing I don't understand is, I'm not sure why we're arguing psychiatry, because I'm telling you what it is.
Dr. Siegel, you just need to answer the question.
Okay.
So you want to talk about cluster B, so let's do that for a minute. Borderline personality disorder is a risk factor. Factor for IPV.
As part of cluster B traits, yes.
Histrionic personality disorder is a risk factor for IPV.
Less so.
But it
Less so. Less so.
It's
I mean,
cluster B.
it's a risk factor, but less so, yes.
Yeah.
Less so. Significantly less so.
All right. So which traits under narcissistic, before I move on there, there's only been one diagnosis in court of personality disorders, correct?
I'm not sure who you're referring to. Are you referring to Mr. Depp, Ms. Heard? I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Do you understand that there was a medical examination done of Ms. Heard?
Yes, I did.
do you understand that the testimony was ultimately that Ms. Heard suffers from 2 personality disorders?
Okay, so I'm just being specific. I just wanted to know if you're talking about Ms. Heard or Mr. Depp. So that's all I was asking you.
Yes or no to my question?
Which was there's only one diagnosis of, Ms. Heard was diagnosed with that.
Yeah, and both of the diagnoses are in cluster B, and both of them are risk factors for IPV.
But both those cluster B things are, I'm not allowed to comment on the testing, so therefore, all I can say is that cluster B traits, and I'll tell you what they are, and by the way, I testified this before, which was that, 1, I don't expect perfection from my victims. 2, absolutely there were cluster B traits Ms. Heard had. Absolutely, Ms. Heard had.
Given that you've testified to it before, let's move on to a new question.
Okay.
All right? You indicated, in your opinion today, that you thought, well, why don't we move a little different? Are you a member of the American Medical Association?
No.
Okay, so you don't know what the ethical rule of the American...
Medical degree of probability, the answer is they will. But if you're saying uniformly, the answer is no.
Right. IPV can occur without substance abuse?
Oh, sure.
Someone can abuse substances without ever perpetrating IPV?
Again, absolutely. But, again, you are saying different than what I said. I did not say abusing substances. I said substance use disorder. Those are 2 different things, because there are surely people who use substances that do not engage in any violence, do not become psychotic, nothing at all. So
and that's
absolutely.
equally true of people who have substance abuse disorder. There are certainly people who have substance abuse disorder who don't commit IPV, correct?
They are saying people who have substance use disorders, the majority of them, over 50% do. So over 50% do. So that's medical.
The answer is yes.
As you said, not everyone who smokes gets lung cancer.
So there are significant numbers of people. You said it was over 50, so you'd say 40% of the people who have substance abuse disorder don't commit IPV?
And those are the ones that do not have IPV risk factors, though, right? So we're talking about people.
Wait a minute. Isn't substance abuse disorder an IPV risk factor?
Oh, yeah. These are other people that don't have other risk factors, right?
Right. But again, we're talking about people in general. You don't know anything about any particular individual as to whether anybody's going to commit IPV.
If statistics follow through, all we can say is more than 50%, 70% will. If you combine more risk factors you have, the more likely you're going to develop the illness. If you smoke cigarettes once, that might not correlate to lung cancer. If you smoke it chronically, that might.
Right.
So that's all I'm
we're
saying.
talking about individuals here. You either have lung cancer or you don't, right?
If you're smoking.
Right.
Right.
You either commit IPV or you didn't.
Oh, I mean, yeah, you either did or you didn't, yes.
Right. So you took some issue with me because I was asking about substance abuse generally, and you wanted me to talk about the disorder. I asked you earlier about narcissistic personality disorder, and You haven't made that diagnosis. You've just talked about the traits, right?
Yes.
And somebody can have these narcissistic personality traits and substance abuse disorder and never commit IPV, right?
So, along that line,
Right.
about 80 to 90% of people who commit IPV have a personality disorder. So the answer is less than about 10% obviously do not.
Right. There are more close links with IPV for borderline personality disorder than narcissistic personality disorder. Correct, sir?
I'm not going to agree with that.
No?
I'm not saying there are more links. I would say to you there are absolute. If you're asking me there are links, the answer is absolutely. If you're saying to me more, I can show studies say yes, so studies say no. That has not been absolutely definitively correlated. No.
No.
Absolutely not.
MDMA. What is it?
Ecstasy.
Yeah. And what's the normal dosage of ecstasy for people who use ecstasy?
Again, I couldn't tell you the quote-unquote normal dose because, honestly speaking, no one knows what they're getting when they're using it, right? It's not regulated, so.
But the effects of ecstasy enhance sense of well-being?
At low doses, the answer is yes. I'm going to gather when you're using it at higher doses and develop tolerance, you develop the sympathomimetic effects, which are not so enhanced well-being.
Increased extroversion, that's a symptom?
Again, at low dose, you are 100% right. At low amounts, you are 100% right. It is an entactogen. We feel closer to people. That's what people who use it say. They feel close to people, warmth to people. 100%. But with continual use and higher doses, it could be fatal. Right. So that's not well-being. I don't know if I'd call that well-being.
So continued use at higher doses, MDMA can be fatal, correct?
Correct.
What if you took 8 to 10 tablets of MDMA?
What if you took again, you don't know what it's very hard to say that. You don't know what it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Contaminated with. Okay, you can't just say, hey, let me just take 8 to 10 pure ecstasy and see what happens. That's not going to happen. So what I would say to you, again, because substance abuse are unpredictable, they are not regulated, no one knows what they're going to. No one absolutely has any idea whether it's going to cause this empathic entactogen effect at very low doses, or is it going to cause the sympathomimetic, increase, it's like a stimulant, like cocaine, something we talked about like that. No one knows what's going to happen. It's not regulated. And no one knows if you're using with other substances either, like other stimulants.
Or if you mix it with alcohol.
Or if you mix it with alcohol. No one knows if it's going to be potentially worse.
Right. But this is a potentially lethal combination. 8 to 10 MDMA pellets and alcohol.
This is a potentially toxic combination.
Right.
Can it kill you? Yeah, I mean, it is a potentially toxic combination. That's true.
Ever heard of someone cutting off their own finger on MDMA?
Have I ever heard of it?
Yeah.
No, I can only give you one example.
Hadn't seen that one before. Okay. So, Seroquel. That one puts you to sleep, right?
If you want to phrase a barbiturate putting you to sleep, then the answer is yes.
Yeah, you heard Mr. Depp talking about sometimes being on the nod, right?
And again, I think I explained Seroquel very well this morning.
Good. I'm going to ask him a few more questions.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right. You kept making references to street value. Why were you doing that?
Because that's why people with substance use disorder use quetiapine and Seroquel.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
That's why people who use quetiapine or Seroquel has it sells on the street because it's so barbiturate-like in effect.
Right, but you said that Mr. Depp had a prescription.
There are many substance use disorder patients who have prescriptions for Adderall and quetiapine from their doctor, and that doesn't mean they're not getting high out of it. That doesn't take much. Doctors like to believe what patients have to say. They're not going to go in there being expert witness testimony. All I'm telling you is that in people who have substance use disorder, it is not uncommon, and the thought was initially that because quetiapine was not addicting, that it's safe to give in people with substance use disorders, when in fact, we absolutely know it has street value. We absolutely know that for a fact.
Right, but my point about this is you made a bunch of testimony about street value, but you knew at the time you made the testimony that Mr. Depp, in fact, had a prescription.
He also had a prescription for oxycodone and roxicodone. Does that count? Because that's also probably not a good thing. It's just because you have a prescription doesn't mean that.
I think Mr. Depp would agree with you it wasn't a good thing.
Just because you have a prescription doesn't mean you can't abuse it.
No, I'm not suggesting you're abusing it. I'm just wondering why your testimony was in any way tied to street value when every single drug you referenced, Mr. Depp had legally.
Again, you can have prescription substance abuse, and we know that, correct? No, I shouldn't be asking that. We can have prescription substance use disorders, and that's not uncommon if you look at the opiate epidemic that we're living in right now. We can have that. That's not an uncommon thing. Unfortunate, but uncommon. Not uncommon.
So, Seroquel, I think you described as a sleeping agent when used off-label?
When I saw what?
Sleeping agent, Seroquel, when used off-label?
When used off-label, it's used. It can be used sleeping agent. Yes.
Right. So, Mr. Depp's use of Seroquel could account for some of the photos we saw in this trial, where he's asleep in a chair.
Again, what I would say to you is that if you have a substance use disorder, you are using it to be knocked out. Yes, I agree. But I'm not sure at the end of the day if she'd have vomitus over you either, because I've never seen Seroquel do that. So when he was passed out in the chair, he also had vomitus over him. I've never seen Seroquel do that ever.
Neurontin is another one of the drugs you testified about. That one's also prescribed, right?
Yes, it is.
And what's the prescription for that?
What's it used for? And what's its indication, or what's its use?
What's its indication?
I mean, its indication is for seizures. It may have one pain indication. Again, I'm not a neurologist, so I can't tell you exactly if it does, but it's chronically used off-label for pain. It's used off-label for anxiety.
Right. And what's its effect? That's another one that'll put you to sleep, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, sure, 100%.
Right. And you made reference to a picture. There's been testimony around that picture that Mr. Depp fell asleep with ice cream in his hand. That's not vomitous, right?
I was told it was vomitous.
Okay. You talked about the fact that Mr. Depp indicates that from time to time he uses an earpiece.
I read that, yes.
Okay. Did you read the testimony of Mr. Wyatt, who told you what was being pumped into that earpiece?
Yeah, I mean, if I remember right, I mean, I think it was lines, right?
No, it was music.
It was music, not his line?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if Mr. Depp was listening to music rather than being fed his lines, does that change your opinion as to his cognitive function?
If he was never fed his lines, through the earpiece, which I know he was, but read he was, and that may have been that example. Mr. Wyatt may have said that it was music. I guess the question is, were you having the music during the actual talking of your lines? Is that what you're saying to me?
Well, you know, if you can do two things at once, that's a pretty high cognitive function, isn't it, sir?
You know, it's a very good point, actually. Divided attention is something humans have a lot of trouble in. Yeah. So, for instance, we have trouble driving and putting on using our cell phones and direct. So divided attention humans actually are not very good at. I'll put that out there.
But Mr.
In general, not just Mr. Depp, in general.
But Mr. Depp is pretty good at acting. You acknowledge that early on.
Absolutely. Well, better than me, so I know that.
Because you don't act. In fact, you don't know about acting.
You're right. I have no idea about acting.
And you don't know how prevalent the use of earpieces are in acting.
Again, I know nothing about acting.
Irrespective of the fact you know nothing about acting, you've testified that Mr. Depp's use of an earpiece is somehow a cognitive deficit?
So if I was giving a lecture and I was fed my lines, I would think there's a cognitive deficit. So and maybe I'm wrong. Like I said, maybe I could be wrong. Maybe Hollywood stars get lines fed to them through earpieces all the time, and I don't know. That could be said. It sounded to me to be unusual if you're doing a movie and you don't know the lines. But like you said, I'm just judging it on what I do with lectures, and that would never happen.
If you gave lectures, you wouldn't use an earpiece, but you're not going to tell anybody how to act.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I said if you gave lectures, you wouldn't use an earpiece, but you're not telling anybody how to act.
Right, I would not use an earpiece during lectures.
Right.
But I don't know what the standard for care of standard as Hollywood is for that. I have no idea.
Your testimony about the use of an earpiece, as maybe you were wrong. You're comfortable with the fact that you may have made a mistake there?
No, because I think in the basis of what I've read about it, I'm comfortable that I don't believe that actors are routinely given their entire script through earpieces. I find that hard to believe.
Yeah,
But-
and
but-
there's not one whit of evidence that this ever happened here.
I guess what I said. I just said I find it hard to believe. I didn't say it. I said I find it hard to believe. That's all I said.
Oh, yeah, but what you found hard to believe, sir, was that every line of the script was pumped through an earpiece. Where did you ever get the idea that occurred?
That's what That's what I read in the court review, the court evidence. That's where I got it from.
All right. And you know whether Marlon Brando used an earpiece?
Isn't he dead?
Yeah.
So the answer is no. He does not use one now.
No, I used the past tense, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Again, I know nothing. I will concede to you, I know nothing about acting. I will concede to you 100%. If that is the standard and people are done that's acting, then I apologize and that was wrong on my part. If that's the standard, I'm wrong. I don't know.
Okay. Let's go with that. No further questions.
All right. How long is your reading?
A bit. You may want to take.
All right, let's go ahead and break for lunch then, ladies and gentlemen. Again, do not do any outside research. Do not discuss your testimony with anybody, okay?
Yeah. An interesting question. They never observed any kind of.
They're divorced.
Johnny, she hit him because.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We have a very special lunch break right now in the
case. Explain to the jury what that is, please.
So often with crush injuries and
comes in.
That doctor made a good witness. He's undeniably qualified. He
Yes.
wasn't particularly combative. He offered an explanation that was semi-helpful, and then it kind of blew up. But he wasn't bad in any way for them.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's an expert I would hire. You know, I wouldn't hire the guy following. But Camille did a really good job disarming him.
Yeah, I think
Well,
so too.
She's interesting. I would be interested. We wind up following her career at all. If she appears on another trial, if she can dial